Inside the office of Apex Designs, the energy was just as thick. Keyboards clicked like 100 tiny hammers, and the low murmur of conversation filled the open-plan space. Ada focused on the architectural draft on her screen, a blueprint for a new residential complex in Lekki. She had worked hard for this quiet corner, for this small measure of peace. 3 years. It had taken her 3 long years to rebuild, 3 years to turn the loud, ugly whispers into silence. 3 years to prove that she was more than the broken woman they all thought she was. She had earned her place here, line by line, project by project. Her work was good. It was solid. That was all that mattered. Then the glass doors to their department slid open and a man walked in. The low hum of the office stopped. Keyboards went quiet, heads lifted. Ada's heart gave a hard, painful thump against her ribs just once. She didn't need to see his face clearly to know who it was. She knew the confident way he walked, the easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. David Adebayo. He was dressed in a sharp suit that probably cost more than her rent for 6 months. He looked older, with a few lines around his eyes, but he still had the same careless charm that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her feel cold. Her boss, Mr. Aliyu, hurried over to greet him. "David, welcome. Welcome. Everyone, this is Mr. Adebayo. He'll be joining us as a guest consultant for the Sterling Tower project." A polite ripple of greetings went through the room. Ada kept her eyes fixed on her screen, her hands tight on her mouse. She prayed he wouldn't see her, that he would just walk past. But of course he didn't. She felt a shadow fall over her desk. Well, Ada Okoro. Still here, I see.
Still stuck here, huh? I guess some people just never level up.
His voice was smooth, but there was a sharp edge to it, meant only for her. She forced herself to look up. His smile was a weapon. "Hello, David." "Still stuck at this little desk, huh?" he said, his voice a little louder now. A few of her nearby colleagues shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen. "I guess some people just never level up." The words were a slap, a public one. She saw a few people hide small smiles. The shame was hot, crawling up her neck. It was happening all over again. She felt small, just like she had 3 years ago. Her throat was tight, and she couldn't find a single word to say. She just stared at him, her vision blurring for a second. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low whisper that no one else could hear. "It was so easy back then," he murmured, his breath warm and unwelcome. "I wonder if it still is." He straightened up, gave a charming nod to the rest of the room, and walked away toward Mr. Aliyu's office, leaving Ada frozen in her chair. The sound of keyboards started again, but it was different now. It was filled with the weight of whispers, and every click felt like a judgment. Her carefully built world, the one she had worked so hard to protect, was starting to crack. She took a shaky breath, the blueprint on her screen now a meaningless blur. She was afraid, terribly afraid, that the past she had buried was about to rise up and swallow her whole. 3 years ago, the world had been bright. Ada was 26, a rising star at a smaller but respected architectural firm in Ikeja. She was in love, and she was on the verge of greatness. Her designs for a new eco-friendly corporate headquarters had caught the eye of the partners. The project was hers to lead, a career-making opportunity. And she was engaged to David Adebayo. He was handsome, ambitious, and came from a well-known Lagos family. He swept her off her feet with grand promises and a smile that made her believe anything was possible. They planned a wedding, a future, a life built on shared dreams. Her best friend Sarah was supposed to be her maid of honor. Sarah had been her rock, the sister she never had. They had shared everything since their university days in Ibadan, secrets, fears, and dreams. Ada trusted her completely. One evening, bursting with excitement, Ada spread her final blueprints across the dining table of the apartment she shared with David. "This is it," she said, her voice full of joy. "This is the one that will change everything." David and Sarah gathered around, praising her work. "It's brilliant, Ada," David said, kissing her forehead. "Truly brilliant." Sarah hugged her tightly. "You deserve this more than anyone I know." Ada showed them everything, The innovative energy systems, the unique structural concepts, the detailed notes she had spent months perfecting. She trusted them with her masterpiece, the physical form of all her hard work and hope. That night, she felt like she was standing on top of the world. 2 weeks later, the world came crashing down. She came home early from a site visit, planning to surprise David. The surprise was hers. She found him with Sarah, their betrayal laid bare in the silence of their shared apartment. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The blueprints for her future, both personal and professional, were torn to shreds in that single heartbreaking moment. The argument that followed was a storm of tears and accusations. But the worst was yet to come. David, cornered and cruel, turned on her. Sarah, her face pale with guilt, stood by his side, silent. The next day at work, the whispers started. Ada found out that her project had been given to another team. When she confronted her boss, he looked at her with pity. "Ada, there are concerns," he said, avoiding her eyes. "David and Sarah mentioned you've been unstable, under a lot of pressure. Maybe it's best you take a step back." She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. They had not only broken her heart, they had poisoned her reputation. They had used her vulnerability against her, painting her as emotional and unreliable. They had stolen her project, her dream, using her own trust as the weapon. The betrayal was total. It was not just an affair. It was a calculated destruction of her life. She had lost her fiancé, her best friend, and her career in one swift, brutal stroke. The bright world she had known just weeks before was gone, replaced by a grey, lonely landscape of shame and defeat. She packed her things from the office in a small cardboard box, the sympathetic and curious stares of her colleagues following her as she walked out the door. The foundation of her life had crumbled, and she had no idea how she would ever start to build it again. The weeks that followed were a blur of grey days and long nights. Ada found a small, simple flat in Surulere, a world away from the bright, modern apartment she had shared with David. She left her job, unable to face the pity and the whispers. She sent out her resume, but the architectural community in Lagos was small. The rumors, like a stubborn stain, followed her. No one wanted to hire the unstable genius. She felt like a ghost in her own city. The vibrant energy of Lagos, with its blaring Danfo bus horns and the constant thrum of life, felt distant and mocking. She spent most of her days inside, watching the rain lash against her windows during the wet season, the sky as dark as her mood. The pain of the betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. She had given David and Sarah everything, her love, her trust, her dreams. They had taken it all and left her with nothing. One evening, driving home through a torrential downpour, her old car sputtered and died in the middle of a flooded street. The water was rising and the engine was silent. Tears of frustration and despair streamed down her face, mixing with the rain. It felt like the final, cruel joke in a long line of them. She sat there for what felt like an hour, the water seeping into her car, when a black, sleek car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and a man with a calm, kind face looked out. Are you all right, madam?" he asked, his voice steady over the drumming of the rain. Ada could only shake her head, too exhausted to speak. Without another word, he was out of his car, wading through the murky water. He was dressed in an expensive suit, now getting soaked, but he didn't seem to care. He helped her push her car to the side of the road, out of the main flow of traffic. Then he called a tow truck for her and waited with her until it arrived, standing under his large umbrella, shielding her from the worst of the storm. He didn't ask many questions. He just stood there, a quiet, reassuring presence in the middle of her personal storm. His name was Ben Thompson, he told her. He was an investor. When the tow truck finally hooked up her car, he offered her a ride home. She was hesitant, but there was something in his eyes, a deep, steady kindness that made her trust him. In his clean, quiet car, away from the rain, she felt a tiny flicker of warmth for the first time in months. He didn't pry or offer empty words of comfort. He simply drove her home, ensuring she was safe. As she got out of the car, she turned to thank him. "Why did you stop?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't have to." He looked at her for a long moment, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes," he said softly, "even those who look like they can handle everything on their own." And with that, he was gone. Ada stood in the rain, watching his car disappear into the Lagos night. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, she didn't feel completely alone. A stranger's simple act of kindness had offered her a lifeline. She didn't know it then, but that dark, rainy night was not an ending. It was a new, uncertain beginning. That small seed of hope, planted by a kind stranger, was about to take root. 3 years later, the memory of that rainy night felt like a scene from another life. Ada unlocked the door to her penthouse apartment in Ikoyi. The space was open and airy, with large windows that looked out over the glittering Lagos skyline. It was a world away from the small, damp flat in Surulere. It was a world she had built with Ben. She dropped her bag on a chair, the encounter with David still replaying in her mind. His smug smile, the casual cruelty in his words, the way her colleagues had looked at her. It was all so familiar, a ghost she thought she had long since left behind. Her hands were still trembling slightly. The power was out. Of course it was. The sudden silence was punctuated by the distant, familiar chorus of generators kicking on across the neighborhood. NEPA had taken the light again. The city's unreliable power grid was a constant frustration, but tonight the darkness felt fitting. She lit a few candles, their soft glow dancing on the polished floors. She had met Ben again a few months after their first encounter. It had been a chance meeting at an art gallery. He had remembered her, and this time they talked for hours. He was quiet, thoughtful, and saw past the broken pieces to the woman she was trying to become. He didn't see her as unstable or weak, he saw her as strong. Their love had grown slowly, quietly, a sturdy plant in the shelter of their private world. They married a year later, in a small private ceremony with only a few close friends. They had decided to keep their marriage a secret, especially at work. Ben was a reclusive but powerful figure in the business world, with investments across the country. Ada didn't want anyone to think she had gotten her new job at Apex Designs because of him. She needed to prove to herself and to the world that she could succeed on her own terms. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Ben, calling from his business trip in Abuja. "Hello, my love." His deep, calm voice was a comfort. "Hi," she said, trying to keep her own voice steady. "How was your day?" "Long but successful," he said. "I'm thinking of coming home a day early. I miss you." Ada's heart fluttered. "I miss you too." There was a pause. Ben knew her too well. "What's wrong, Ada? Your voice sounds tight." She hesitated. She didn't want to burden him. She didn't want him to think she couldn't handle it. "It's nothing. Just a long day at the office." "Is it David?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharp. Ada was silent for a moment. There was no hiding anything from him. "He's back, Ben. He's a consultant on the Sterling Tower project." She heard him take a slow breath on the other end of the line. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken history. He knew everything about David, about Sarah, about the project she had lost. He knew the depths of the pain they had caused her. "I'm on my way," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "Don't worry, Ada. I will handle this." The line went dead. Ada stood in the flickering candlelight, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over her. What did he mean, handle this? Ben was not a man of loud threats or grand gestures. His power was quiet, precise, and absolute. She had seen him dismantle corporate giants with a few quiet words in a boardroom. The thought of him turning that focus on David filled her with a mixture of relief and dread. She had wanted to face this ghost on her own, but now a storm was coming, and she was no longer sure who it would destroy. The next day, David walked into the office as if he owned it. He had a coffee in one hand and was laughing with Mr. Aliyu, his confidence filling the room like a bad smell. Ada tried to ignore him, burying herself in her work, but it was impossible. He had an energy that demanded attention. He called a team meeting for the Sterling Tower project first thing in the morning. Everyone gathered in the glass-walled conference room. David stood at the head of the table, radiating authority. He went through the current plans, his eyes scanning the documents with a critical gaze. When he got to Ada's section, the environmental impact and sustainability features, he paused. He looked directly at her, a small, condescending smile playing on his lips. "Mrs. Okoro," he began, using her married name with a slight mocking emphasis. It was a small jab, a reminder that she had moved on, but he was still there to haunt her. "Your projections here seem optimistic. Are you sure these numbers are accurate? We can't afford any emotional guesswork on a project of this scale." The word emotional hung in the air, a deliberate echo of the past. Ada felt her cheeks grow hot. She took a steadying breath. "The numbers are based on the latest industry data and material specifications, Mr. Adebayo. They are accurate." He raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Of course. I'm just making sure we're all operating with a clear head." He was trying to corner her, to make her look incompetent in front of her peers. It was the same tactic he had used before, but this time Ada was not the same broken girl. She met his gaze, her own expression calm and steady. "My head is perfectly clear," she said, her voice even. "The data is in the report. If you have a specific question about the calculations, I'm happy to walk you through them." David's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to her pushing back. Before he could respond, Grace, a kind senior architect who had always been friendly to Ada, spoke up. "Ada's sustainability models are the most thorough I've seen," Grace said calmly. "She's meticulous." The support, small as it was, gave Ada a surge of strength. David, seeing he had lost the moment, waved a dismissive hand. "Very well, we'll move on." He then spent the rest of the meeting talking about his grand vision for the project. He announced that he would be personally leading the final pitch to the investors at the annual corporate showcase in a few weeks. "We need to show them something truly innovative, something they've never seen before," he declared, his eyes gleaming. "And I have just the thing." Ada felt a chill run down her spine. His words were too confident, too familiar. He was planning something. After the meeting, Grace caught her by the water cooler. "Be careful, Ada," she whispered, her eyes serious. "I saw him trying to access old project files on the server this morning, files from 3 years ago." Ada's blood ran cold. He wasn't just there to torment her, he was there for something else. And with a sickening feeling, she began to suspect what it was. He was looking for her old designs, the ones he had stolen from her once before. He was planning to do it again, but this time on a much bigger stage. The ghost of her past was not just haunting her, it was trying to erase her future. The front door of the penthouse opened quietly that evening. Ben stood in the doorway, his travel bag at his feet. He looked tired from the trip, but his eyes were sharp as they found Ada's. He dropped his bag and crossed the room in a few long strides, pulling her into a hug. She melted into his arms, the tension of the last 2 days finally starting to ease. He held her for a long moment, his hand stroking her hair. He didn't say anything, just let her feel his solid, steady presence. "You came back," she whispered into his chest. "I told you I would," he said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Tell me what happened." They sat on the sofa, the city lights twinkling below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Ada told him everything. She told him about David's arrival, the public taunts, the meeting, and Grace's warning about the old files. As she spoke, she felt the familiar sting of tears, but she held them back. She was done crying over David Adebayo. Ben listened without interrupting. His face was a calm mask, his expression unreadable, but she could feel the tension in his hand as he held hers. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Ada's anxiety returned. She had wanted to handle this herself, to prove that she was strong enough. Now she feared Ben's involvement would only complicate things. It would expose their secret marriage, and everyone at work would think she had run to her powerful husband for help. They would never see her as an equal. "You shouldn't have come back," she said softly. "I can handle him." Ben finally turned to look at her, his eyes dark and serious. "I have no doubt that you can, Ada, but you shouldn't have to. Not again." He squeezed her hand gently. "That man tried to destroy you once. I will not let him have a second chance. But what will you do? She asked, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. If you go to the office and cause a scene, it will only make things worse for me. They'll say I only have my job because I'm married to you. There will be no scene, Ben said, his voice holding a quiet authority that always surprised her. He won't know what's happening until it's too late. He stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her. Trust me, my love. I will handle this. Ada watched his silhouette against the bright city lights. She trusted him more than anyone in the world. This situation felt different. This was her battle, her past. His protection, as much as she loved him for it, felt like it could become another kind of cage. She didn't want to be the woman who needed saving. She wanted to be the woman who had saved herself. She took a deep breath, the fear still there, but something else was rising alongside it. A quiet resolve. She didn't know what Ben was planning, but she knew she had to be ready. Whatever storm was coming, she would face it on her own 2 feet. Ben's quiet promise hung in the air. A shield she wasn't sure she wanted, but was grateful to have. She just hoped that when it was all over, she would still be able to stand on her own. The next morning, the office was electric with a nervous energy. Mr. Aliou had called an all-hands meeting, announcing a surprise visit from a major shareholder of the parent company, Thompson Investments. No one had ever met the firm's reclusive founder. His name was spoken in whispers in the corporate world, a legend known for his sharp mind and ruthless business tactics. Ada's heart pounded as she took her seat in the conference room. She knew what was coming. A few minutes later, the doors opened and Mr. Aliou walked in, followed by Ben. A collective gasp went through the room. People sat up straighter, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. This was Ben Thompson, the man who had quietly acquired their company last year. He looked calm and composed, his dark suit simple but impeccably tailored. He surveyed the room with a cool, detached gaze. David was sitting near the front, looking smug. His expression quickly changed from arrogance to confusion as he saw Ben. He had clearly not been expecting this. Ben's eyes scanned the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on Ada before moving on. No one would have noticed the look, but Ada felt it, a silent message of support. Mr. Aliou made the formal introductions, his voice trembling slightly. Mr. Thompson, thank you for joining us. We're honored to have you. The honor is mine, Ben said, his voice calm and clear. I like to know the people who work for me. He then turned his attention to David. And you must be Mr. Adebayo, our new consultant. I've heard about your ambitious plans for the Sterling Tower project. David stood up, forcing a confident smile. Mr. Thompson, it's a pleasure. Yes, I believe my new direction will bring significant returns. I'm sure it will, Ben said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming colder. But before we proceed, I'd like to have a word with you in private. My office. He gestured toward a smaller, adjoining room. The color drained from David's face. He followed Ben into the room, and the glass door closed behind them. The rest of the team sat in stunned silence, exchanging nervous glances. Ada's hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see them through the glass. Ben was speaking calmly, his expression unmoving. David, on the other hand, was growing more and more agitated. He was gesturing wildly, his face pale. Then she saw it. Ben said something quiet, and David froze. His arrogant posture collapsed. He looked down at the floor, then slowly lifted his head to look at Ben. And for the first time, Ada saw pure, undiluted terror in David's eyes. He stared at Ben, then his gaze darted across the room and landed on Ada. In that moment, he knew. He knew that the quiet, powerful man who held his entire career